In this lesson, we'll be looking at common pawn weaknesses that occur in most chess games. The chess pieces exist in a hierarchy of power. The pawn is the lowest ranking member because unlike the other pieces, it can only move forward one square after its first move. Being slow of foot makes the pawn an ideal target for the other pieces, unless the pawn is defended by another pawn. That is why a great deal of the maneuvering on the chessboard is to create a weakened pawn structure for the enemy which cannot be defended by other pawns, which will then relegate higher ranking pieces to their defense. Controlling your opponent is a primary strategic aim in chess, and one way to do that is to make his pieces defend weak pawns. From the starting position, the pawns are in their ideal formation. From there they can advance with protection from the rear pawns. For example, if the white pawn advances 2 squares attacking the knight could swing around and attack the pawn. But the connected rear pawn can simply advance 1 square and defend the pawn. But notice that the base of the pawn chain here has no defender, which always makes it a potential target. That's why pawns need to march in unison up the board, each protecting the other as they move forward. One way to disrupt the ideal pawn structure is to create what are called doubled pawns. One common sequence of opening moves which often achieves this goes like this. Pawn to d4, knight to f6, pawn to c4. Pieces are developing towards the center, preparation for castling. Pawn to e6, knight to c3. Now the bishop slides down and pins the knight. And he's actually threatening to create the doubled pawns. And if white ignores this by developing the knight to f3, then the bishop would be free to capture the knight, and the pawn recaptures, and now these pawns are doubled. And this pawn has no pawns which can defend it, which will relegate the other pieces to defending that pawn. In fact, that's a common strategy in chess, to create these weakened pawns and then go after them with pieces. The knight could slide here, maybe the queen could pile up on this pawn and maybe win it. All of the other known pawn weaknesses involve pawns which cannot be defended by other pawns. In this diagram, taken from my book, we see the most frequently occurring. In chess parlance, they are called, this is called an isolated pawn. See another isolated pawn here and one here. These pawns are very weak. They can never be defended by another pawn. And here we see the base of the pawn chain. Here we see doubled pawns, which we looked at. And this pawn here is called a backward pawn. It's connected to another pawn, and one strategy to prevent it from moving forward up the board is to blockade it with a piece, and ideally a knight, because the knight's then free to attack squares as well. And then when you get enough pieces coordinated to attack that base pawn here, the backward pawn, you can try to win it. So look for opportunities to create these types of weakened pawn structures in your opponent's position, and avoid doing the same in your own.